Another year means more games that competed to be the best of the best. And while 2020 was a pretty bad year with COVID running amok and our nation's leadership being a mess, but at least we had our video games. Hey Shackers, Greg here, and today I'll be counting down the top 10 games of 2020. This year, the list was determined by votes from our own Shacknews staff and community. So let's look back on this terrible year and see what games helped us get through it. These are the top 10 best games of 2020.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
What an incredible year was for games. There were strong contenders all about, and it was not an easy task to narrow it down to 10. But among so many graphically innovative titles and genre-defying games, Streets of Rage 4 stayed on folks' radar. The game is a once-in-a-generation brawler love letter masterpiece. It's got it all: amazing hand-drawn sprites, an incredible distinct art style, fantastic fighting mechanics on par with actual fighting games, secrets out the wazoo, and challenge systems that make it a blast to pursue high scores and harder difficulties. It's also got a banger original soundtrack from top to bottom that incorporates classic franchise tunes into new electronica beats. Streets of Rage 4 is both a modern masterpiece and relic of a bygone time. It's hard to imagine anyone will put this much tender loving care into another brawler for a long time, but if anyone does, we hope they treat their craft with as much passion, talent, and respect as .emu, Guard Crush Games, and Lizard Cube poured into Streets of Rage 4. We would also happily accept more Streets of Rage 4 in the form of Max Thunder, Estil, Shiva, and Rue DLC, please, and thank you. It would have been easy to trot out Miles Morales and make him into a different shade of Peter Parker. However, Insomniac Games not only had a distinctly Miles Morales story to tie into Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, the developer made his story come alive in different ways. The detailed Harlem landscape and the injection of a new Venom power set helped ensure that this was no mere Marvel's Spider-Man 1.5. This is Miles' world, and players are welcome to meet the new Spider-Man on the block.
I promise to do everything in my power to protect this city. I promise.
For all its flaws, Cyberpunk 2077 is still quite a game. It's a vast explorable future playground of gangs, crooked cops, corporate interest, and every kind of mercenary just looking to scrape by in the urban jungle. Whether you work for the gangs, guns with the corpos, do the dirty work of the police, or sample the other forbidden pursuits of Night City, you do have an undeniable freedom to pursue your leisurely path through it all, and a decent amount of RPG mechanics, action shooting and melee combat, and dialogue guides you down the path you want to partake in. Much like previous CD Projekt Red games, going right from A to B is doing this game a disservice. There's so much to explore around every corner and alleyway of this city. Sometimes it's an opportunity in wait, sometimes it's a bullet with your name on it. Certainly, Cyberpunk 2077 didn't come out in the best state for all platforms, and there are definite problematic points of content in the game's narrative itself. But it's hard to argue against the fact that CDPR put out a game worthy of conversations throughout several years. Interestingly enough, it will likely be the center of certain conversations in gaming well into 2021, for better or worse.
Wake the fuck up, samurai. We have a city to burn.
Here's a simple fact. Short of an open-world sandbox, there is no game with a solid narrative or arrangement of mechanics that will allow you to be as flexible in how you approach it as Wasteland 3 will. This RPG is incredible in its freedom. Do you want to be the kind of duo that goes heavy on the lead and guns a-blazing? You can. Do you want to be a scientific computer genius, a lock-picking thief, master of explosives, both disarming and rearming, or a machine king of scrap, circuitry, and all things robotic? You can do that too. Do you want to talk your way out of any trouble that could possibly force you into a fight you don't want? You get the idea. Now couple that with character freedom with an absolute bonkers world of choice and consequence. Wasteland 3's narrative is a wild one, and the choices you make every step of the way ripple throughout the world in meaningful ways. There's even routes to ending the game in just a few hours, or making it last for many dozens, depending on how you play it. And along the way, there will be plenty of radioactive creatures, gangs, and settlement leaders to test your ranger's mettle. In Exile had a lot of work to do to make a truly delicious follow-up in the Wasteland franchise, and arguably, Wasteland 3 is everything it ought to be. Naughty Dog had kept its fans in suspense for the next installment of The Last of Us for nearly a full console cycle. The Last of Us Part 2 did not disappoint. Further fleshing out the hellscape of the post-apocalyptic world, players did more than just experience Ellie's tragic existence. The narrative was so nuanced and multidimensional. Ellie's adversaries proved to be more than anyone expected. That's before even going into the improvements to the gameplay elements, including the upgraded gunplay and refined stealth. The Last of Us Part 2 is a gaming experience like few others, and stands as one of Naughty Dog's great triumphs. We've seen little shortage of open-world adventures that continue to bend the mind when it comes to what an engaging environment in these games ought to be. Ghost of Tsushima is a transcendent example of such a game, without question. The Japanese island of Tsushima is as much of a character as figure you might speak with in the game, unraveling itself as an ever-gorgeous tapestry of natural beauty, jagged danger, and the war-torn ugliness of mankind. This living island is chock full of interesting characters, each pursuing their own purpose, as Jin Sakai seeks aid to turn back Mongol army invaders and save his homeland. The Revenge of Masako, Adachi, Yuna's mission to protect her surviving families, all at the cost of the master archer Ishikawa's effort to keep his teaching from falling into dangerous hands. And so much more are arguably just as compelling as Jin's journey, ensuring that travels across Tsushima are hardly ever dull. Sucker Punch Productions clearly had reverence to an astounding degree for the stories of samurai and feudal Japan, and it shows in every fiber of grass in Tsushima's vast landscape. Square Enix knew from the beginning that if they were to ever recreate Final Fantasy VII, it would be one of the publisher's greatest challenges ever. It's one of gaming's most beloved stories, but also one with an astonishing amount of detail that modernizing it would mean extending it significantly. The Final Fantasy VII Remake is here, and even though it's only just getting started in telling the original game's full story, the action RPG combat system, the characters, the gorgeous settings, the soundtrack, and so much more made this into everything a Final Fantasy VII fan could have wanted. And as we've learned from more than one member of the Shacknews staff this year, even those who weren't interested in the original classic have found a new appreciation for the game by playing the Final Fantasy VII Remake and seeing it through to the surprise ending. The word roguelike in itself can be intimidating to a certain sector of players. However, Hades didn't shy away from it, and designed it in such a way that the game's players wouldn't shy away from it either. Hades completely rethinks the genre and injects an engaging narrative, a deep and satisfying combat system, the right amount of random moments, and enough long-term engagement to make this into more than just one of Supergiant Games' best efforts to date. Hades is one of the best roguelikes ever. Full stop. Animal Crossing New Horizons can look pretty simple with a cursory glance. The game doesn't really ask much of players, but in that simplicity of gameplay lies the genius of the franchise. Sure, Animal Crossing New Horizons is one of the best-selling games of 2020, but its impact goes far beyond the Nintendo balance sheet or income statement. The game launched in late March of 2020, as the pandemic shutdowns began to take hold. For many players, Animal Crossing New Horizons provided a much-needed escape from what was a very difficult year for most people. The game allowed people to get together online, share ideas for island designs, and even brag about some of the cool stuff they had bought from the Nook store. The game also provided players with a routine sense of normalcy when a lot of the outside world was anything but that. From planting trees, harvesting fruit, fishing, to playing the turnips in the stalk market, Animal Crossing New Horizons gave us a way to escape from the world, even for little bits at a time here and there. It may not be for everyone, but the game deserves very high praise for helping many people get through a very tough year. A lot of Half-Life fans had given up hope that we would ever see a new game again. Like many Valve franchises, the intellectual property had been left sitting on a shelf for so long that it really seemed like we would never get to revisit City 17 again. Last year, Valve confirmed a new Half-Life game. Sure, it wasn't the much anticipated Half-Life 3, but instead the developers brought us into the shores of NPC Alyx Vance in a brand new adventure. Half-Life Alyx requires a VR headset to be enjoyed, but that does not make it any less of a game. One could even argue that the experience achieved by the game was impossible to do on a flat screen experience. Playing as Alyx in the Half-Life universe is amazing, and the developers put an insane amount of effort to make the world as immersive as possible. Every aspect of this game is impressive. Graphics, audio design, gameplay, and narrative design are all perfectly balanced in a way that only few developers are capable of doing. It's not just the best VR game release of 2020, it's the best VR game ever to be released. The innovations and best practices in Half-Life Alyx will push all game design forward for the next decade, and it sits at the top of this amazing list of games released in this banner year for the video game medium. It's not just the best VR game of 2020, it's our Shacknews Game of the Year 2020. Praise Gaben! What were some of your favorite games that came out this year? Let us know in the comments below. From our top 10s and everything else gaming related, you're already in the right place. You're on Shacknews.com.